Welcome to the Wealth Matters podcast, where investors come together to better understand how to build passive cash flow and create generational wealth without all the confusing mumbo-jumbo. Here's your host and co-author of Amazon #1 bestseller, Alpesh Pamar.
Welcome to Wealth Matters podcast. I have an interesting guest today, someone who shares technical background like me, technology entrepreneur, and who moved into real estate. So I'm welcoming Culin Tate to our podcast, and he's also author of Host Coach. The book he sent it to me. I got to read it. Looks amazing book for sure, and I really want to learn how short-term rentals work. So I'm looking forward to this episode.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Alpesh.
Absolutely. So, Culin, hopefully I didn't spill many beans, but tell us something interesting or funny about yourself.
Oh, gosh. Well, 2 years ago, I moved to Athens, Greece with my wife and son sort of on a whim for a year.
Oh, wow. Right before COVID?
Right before COVID.
Oh, my God.
So luckily we front-ended a lot of our travel and only experienced COVID for the last 2 or 3 months that we were there.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So, and then what made you move back to US?
It was my son's 5th grade year in school. And he's also a pretty avid sports player, lacrosse and baseball.
Okay.
And the grandparents, he was the only grandchild on both sides. We thought about sending him back and staying ourselves.
Oh, wow. That would have been nice, right? Grandparents need to take care of him.
just kidding. But it was a great experience. We really wanted to open his eyes to other cultures and ways of life.
Oh, that's awesome. That's one of the ways to experience other cultures, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned a while before we started recording that you come from technology background. You have sold companies a couple of times. So why did you choose real estate?
You know, I think real estate sort of chose me. I had purchased a cabin in 2015 that I was adamant about not renting out. My wife and I always kid about that. But then I started putting it on Airbnb. Some friends of friends wanted to stay there. And it just booked every weekend. It just started to book solid.
Wow. And where was it?
So I operate in the Blue Ridge Mountain area on the East Coast.
Okay.
So, more specifically for me, the Shenandoah Valley.
Okay.
And so, yeah, as you said, I sold a company in 2018 and, sort of did the entrepreneur head scratch. I've started, founded, I was 49 at the time and thinking to myself, I got to start, what's the next big thing? I got to scale something up, right? But that cabin was really making good money, and I'd always been very real estate curious. And so I decided to make the leap, and I ended up purchasing 3 properties that summer of 2018.
That's awesome. So it just started as maybe your second home or something, right?
Exactly.
And that turned into a hobby that, okay, if I can just rent it out, and that's amazing. That's a great story. And I think that is why you are not in the long-term real estate game mostly, right? Because you figured out, or you cracked the code on the short-term side. You're like,
exactly.
this thing works for me. Why try to reinvent the wheel?
That's a wonderful thing about real estate. There's so many different angles, and so many different ways. I had a few long-term. I had a couple condos, but I didn't enjoy them, and I ended up selling them. I didn't enjoy it, and I didn't have enough of them really to have the cash flow be meaningful. So sold those and found my fire in short term.
That's awesome. And so most of my podcast guests have been long-term holders, but I have also interviewed about 4 or 5 short-term rental guys. So, but I want to know more about how you automated your process and why, and how did you hack the algorithm? But before then, what was your first cabin you bought it just for yourself? What was your very first real estate investment? Like, this would be an investment property.
So that summer, I purchased 1 property from a wholesaler, but it needed some work.
Okay.
It took about 5 or 6 months. We needed to drill a well and build a driveway and renovate. That same summer, an opportunity came across to buy another cabin that was already a short-term rental. So it was, turnkey. And that owner had a second cabin that was not on the market, and I was able to convince her to sell it to me off market.
So, so when you bought your first cabin, your idea was to use it for your own. So for
Correct.
second cabin, how did you run your numbers? What did you look at? What did you base those numbers off?
Well, I was operating the first cabin, and they're only a few miles apart. And so I knew, I think at the time those cabins were doing around $6,000 a month in gross.
Nice.
So I had the numbers. I knew my gross and I knew my expenses. And so I was able to, I knew the cost of the new cabin was $170,000 for the one and $200,000 for the second. And so I knew that I was going to have real strong cash flow.
Oh, that makes sense. And so your book's name is Host Coach, right? So it seems you are coaching some people like me to become hosts, right? What are some of the qualities a super host should have, right? Because when I go to Airbnb, I look at, oh, it's a super host. And I usually go ahead and book their property because I think they've gone above and beyond. Their properties are much nicer, or maybe they are more communicative. So what are some of the qualities a super host should have?
I think a super host differs from a typical host in two ways. One, first, in terms of professionalism, super hosts are gauged on their response rates, they're gauged on not canceling on people, and they're gauged on their reviews. So to be a super host, you have to really have a level of professionalism. And I think you also secondly, have to like people. So, that comes across in the way you set up your properties and the way you communicate. And that's, again, what I didn't really like about long-term renting. I didn't love my tenants and I didn't love it when they called. But when you approach hosting from a hospitality perspective, if you can do that, then it's rather enjoyable.
That's a pretty niche quality, right? And there is a subtle difference between, like, because I am a long-term rental home, provider, right? And usually I don't deal with the tenants because I have property manager, but even when the property manager calls me that something broke, I'm like, what's going on, right? But whereas you got to have that kind of quality. So who shouldn't invest in a short-term rental, or who shouldn't buy a short-term rental? Because I have been looking into it for last 3 years. Actually, right before COVID, I was almost on under contract in Orlando. And I didn't pull the trigger. And then I was happy that, I didn't pull the trigger because COVID happened. But it seems actually Airbnb properties did first 6 months, they were bad. And then they did really good. So,
yeah, we had about two slow months there.
Yeah.
But then, it really took off after. This was a good business pre-COVID. But fundamentally, the way people work and travel has changed.
Yes.
And so the business has come back stronger from COVID.
Yeah. So who shouldn't invest in short-term rental?
I think people who, lack passion, if you're doing it just for return, I tell people to pick a place, find their where, find a place that you're excited about, that you wouldn't mind going, with your family. Say it's Orlando or a lake, a river. So if, often I'll get the question, what's the best market to invest in? But that's, in my opinion, the wrong approach, to just chase the crowd. If you're doing it just for numbers and you don't have, a professional, people-oriented hospitality mindset, you really have to start with that mindset.
That's great. And so let's talk about the Airbnb algorithm. How did you hack the algorithm? and what is the hack?
Okay. Well, hack is one of those funny words we use in a lot of different ways, but I think the first is recognizing that Airbnb is a search engine, much like Google is a search engine. So Airbnb has to decide in a given area, say there's 300 listings, 400 listings, they can't show them all simultaneously, right? They have to order them somehow. And so if you start to think about how they order those, there's a lot of factors and we dive into them, but if you're thinking from that perspective, how do I get shown at the top? Because think about it. If you go to Google something, or if you go to search for a property on Airbnb, how many pages do you really flip through, right? So the idea is, how do we get to the top, that page one type placements?
I see. So, and how do you, right? What are some of the criteria you look at, or you make sure, like it's SEO, right?
It is SEO, exactly. Exactly. So in SEO, we start with what? The click rate.
Yes.
So in Airbnb, that is defined, or that's controlled by, you have the influence over your photography and your decor. So if I'm looking at 10 listings on a page, which of those cover photos jumps out at me? And that's done through professional HDR photography, as opposed to don't pull out your camera and think that
Yes.
you're, So if you have beautiful, clean decor and nice colors and paint and professional photographies, you'll get that click through. And that's the first factor.
That is the first factor. And then once someone clicks on it, does Airbnb recognize that these people are getting more clicks? So we need to put
Correct.
their listing at much higher.
Correct. And then the second becomes dwell time. So again, like a website, do I click and bounce, or do I click and really consume the content?
How much time you are spending on that listing?
So do I have lots of beautiful photos? Do I have a grand description? Right? Are people really pouring over and spending time dwelling on that? So that linger time is a second factor into the algorithm.
So you want to put enough description about properties, or provide enough details so that one, they spend time, and second, they don't waste time going back and forth with you, right? Because if you tell them exactly that there will be Wi-Fi, this is how you'll be logging in, there are numerous places to go nearby, then I think they would spend more time on your listing.
Correct. And then your ability to close that sale. Right. And so we control that through our pricing. And we'll talk about technology, but one of the biggest tools in the toolkit for a host, a super host, is to use a third-party dynamic pricing.
Like
dynamic pricing.
Oh, dynamic pricing. Okay.
We can talk about AirDNA too. That's more of a research tool.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
But the idea that there's Airbnb does and Vrbo, the online travel agencies have opened their data through APIs.
Yes, their APIs. Yep, they have to.
Exactly.
It's like Amazon, Google. They all have to open up the APIs so that a third party, maybe it's a plugin, it's a mobile app they consume, and they pretty much manage your booking. If I'm correct.
Exactly. So then there's softwares that take that data and know precisely for a given date range what the supply and demand looks like. So how many people are searching for that? So these pricing tools will then adjust your base price for you automatically up or down to maximize your revenues.
No, that's great. So one more question I have, because when I'm looking for Airbnb properties, I also look at service fee and cleaning fees. Is it good to include them in the price or the rate, or is it better to show them as a separate line item?
You know what? I agree. I've always liked to show a lower cleaning fee, because I never, it's a big surprise when you are looking at something that's $200 a night, and maybe you're thinking about staying for 2 nights, and then there's a $200 cleaning fee.
Yeah, and when you click on it, you immediately, I try to move away when I say, because it shows up at the lowest price. When I click on it, they're like, okay, now the total is more than like 10 other listings. And I'm like, immediately I'll close that window.
So Airbnb has addressed that recently in a software update. So they call it upfront pricing. So the price per night you see has the fees already baked and averaged into the nightly prices. So it's a little bit less of a issue than it was, say, a year ago, 6 months ago.
No, that's great. That's great. And do you only focus on Airbnb, or you also focused on Vrbo, or have you figured out any other short-term rental websites?
So I'm a big proponent of sole platform. So if you're on VRBO, if your listeners or somebody out there right now that's successful on VRBO, stay there.
Okay.
However, splitting your time and your attention across multiple platforms, one is a challenge as a host. There's some softwares that help with it, but you're still dealing with it.
It's very complicated. I was looking at it, like even the calendar, managing the calendar, right?
There's softwares that help.
Yes.
But back to the SEO benefits, right? So now if you're performing equally well on 2 platforms, you're splitting your reviews, you're splitting your clicks, you're splitting your attention, if your calendar is blocked 50% of the time on each platform, how do you think the platform is going to respond to that? Are they going to increase you or decrease you?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And then another thing I noticed is that some of the big people, they have like 5, 10 cabins in the same area. They also develop their own website and hosting mechanism. Do you also do that, or do you recommend that? Like now you have maybe 10 cabins and it's worth to divert that traffic to your own website, or is it not worth the
I do
effort?
I do the opposite actually. So I have 9 cabins, and what I do is I do have an individual website that I list all those cabins. I run Facebook ads to that website,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't take any direct bookings.
I
I
see.
push that traffic directly to the Airbnb links for more views.
That makes sense. So you can at least see the click rate and how the Facebook ads are performing,
Mhm.
but then you don't want to manage the payment and all that, because once you have to start managing the credit card and whatnot, right? Even
Mhm.
though you will use the software, it's another headache, right? And as you
Exactly.
said, the calendar. So
And it's
no, that
another SEO boost, right? It's sort of like link
exactly.
juice, right?
Okay, that makes sense. And at least you can advertise that, okay, if you like this cabin of mine, this is where you
Mhm.
should go, and you can see all 9 cabins.
And particularly, friends or past guests, want to see them all
Right.
in one place.
Exactly. If someone likes staying at one place, they would prefer to go back to the same place or maybe similar place.
Try something new. Yeah.
Exactly.
And with that type of website, we're not doing payment. It's a
No.
striking
Yeah.
type of website. And you can put it together yourself in an hour or two.
So do you more focused on it? Then I'm assuming you are more focused on Airbnb than VRBO.
I am. I have used other platforms, but as I said, I think that the sole platform approach is the way to go to focus your craft in one place, and focus your SEO value in one place. And I think that long term, Airbnb is doing a really great job
Yes.
attracting audience and growing the space. Um, so if you got to pick a horse, if you're starting out and picking a horse, I choose to attach my wagon to the one that I think is going to win the long-term game.
And that's a great point. Like, think about it. Where before we would say search on internet, now you say Google it, right? So same way, short term means, oh, did you Airbnb, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not did you Verbo, right? Mostly.
Mm,
So you have to look at what is the biggest marketplace, right, in the industry, and go for that one first. Now
I
that's
agree.
so another issue I saw with Airbnb when I was looking, and again, I really want to buy at least one short-term rental soon, because so that I can use it for myself as well.
That's
But
another great reason to do it.
exactly. So one issue I had seen is that a lot of time, sometimes the guests do not provide good review, and sometimes Airbnb will not pay you for some reason, or if there is a cancellation. There were some issues during COVID times. So how did you handle those?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. During the COVID times, I wasn't hit with, um, the forced cancellations, meaning I didn't lose a lot of bookings to that. So, but let's not dwell there. Moving forward, you have control over your cancellation policy. There's maybe
Okay.
5 or 6 variations that you can choose from. And then Airbnb manages that policy, or Verbo. All the platforms have options that you can pick as your cancellation policy. So, based on what you're comfortable with. But the more flexible your cancellation policy is, that's another factor in your search results.
Awesome. So let's talk about now the technology side, because you and both
Sure.
I come from IT, right? And how can we not talk about it? What is the short-term rental tech stack for automating all this, right? One cabin, good enough, you can manage.
Right.
2 cabins, maybe you or your wife can help. But when you go to 9, 10 cabins, you got to have the team in place, and then you also got to have the process structure, or a streamlined process. So what are the different technology or softwares you use?
Mm-hmm. The tech stack starts, you mentioned earlier, really at the research phase. So,
Okay.
if someone out there is thinking about where they might want to purchase a vacation rental, a short-term rental, and are concerned about how well it may or may not do, what the occupancy would be like, there's a great website, AirDNA, that has some free information, and then you can subscribe on a monthly basis.
Yes.
And it's very inexpensive, $20 or $30 a month.
Yeah, it's not too bad. I had subscribed at some point.
And that gives you investability scores. It gives you regulatory information, average daily rates, seasonality, occupancy levels. So you can determine, is that a good viable market, and start to run some numbers based on average daily rates and average occupancy.
So that is the first research phase. And then once you, let's say, got the property under contract, do you use any kind of technology to move through like due diligence process, etc.?
No, nothing in the due diligence process. The next technologies would kind of come into play when you go live, in terms of your operations, and the most important there being your pricing software. So there's a number out there, Price Labs, Wheelhouse, Beyond Pricing. They all sort of work in a similar way.
And which one do you use?
I use Price Labs.
And what are the pricing for this software?
It's again real similarly subscription-based SaaS model, $19 to $24 a month per property, and well worth far in excess.
Oh yes. If it's automatic, dynamic, it's of course.
And so some people say, short-term rental investing, it's really hot right now. Is it too late to get in? But 90% of hosts don't know what we've already just talked about. 90% of hosts are out there just picking, my rate is $200 a night, and they're overcharging and being unoccupied during the week, and undercharging and
during the peak market,
the weekends, exactly,
or the peak, right? Because so that's a great point. And so other than, of course, AirDNA for research and then the automatic pricing for the pricing, is there anything else you use from technology?
Yeah, I think there's two other really. Two important tools to reference. So operationally, once you, as you mentioned, you get past one or two, that's a lot of messages to send. That's a lot of reviews to write. So there are a number of softwares. I use one called Hospitable, which is an automated messaging. Exactly. So when somebody books or inquires on one of my properties, they get an instantaneous response, which is good for that superhost response rate, right? And I preload those with information, as you said, to cut down on the number of questions asked. So with a single property, you're now only having to answer those very specific questions. How far is it from here? Or do I need to bring charcoal for the grill? Those real specific questions.
That totally makes sense. So basically, when you are setting those answers or Q&A, you are doing it for the specific property, right? So as soon as someone messages you for that property, you will respond back. Okay, makes sense. And what is the fourth software?
The fourth software is, I'll refer to is what gets measured gets managed. So we touched on how important it was to be on that first page of results. And so there's a software called Rank Breeze that monitors your listing for its placements across various numbers of guests. So 2 guests, 3 guests, 4 guests, you might be placing in a different place. You may be ranking slightly differently, right? The 4-bedroom house isn't going to rank that great for 2 guests because 2 guests are going to tend not to book that type of property. So with that data, knowing exactly where you're showing over time, day to day, you can make changes to your pricing or your policies to make sure that you're getting the rank placement that you would like to have, which then subsequently allows you to charge higher prices down the road because you're getting the more views.
No, that makes sense. That's great. I think that is really important other than the pricing. So another question I have is that once you have figured out all this technology stack, do you, and when you started scaling up, did you end up hiring a management company or did you build your own managers like VAs and whatnot to manage all this?
I'm about at the place where I'm thinking about VAs. I'm at 9 properties. But it's really not that much work in terms of the operations. I spent a lot of my time really in acquisition and renovation mode. But once the properties get going, then the messaging is automated, the pricing is automated. I have great housekeepers that keep an eye on things.
They are the most important ones.
They are the most important business partner.
Because when I go there and if I see a hair, I'm like, okay, I'm not coming back here. So
And then,
yeah, that,
then there's Amazon, so if they need supplies, if the cabin needs,
okay.
soaps and shampoos or cleaning supplies, I just place an Amazon order and drop ship the materials.
And what about if there is any issue with the property?
I have, I have a handyman
Okay.
that I can call who's local to, go fix a, loose doorknob or a cabinet door that's come off or a dishwasher that's not working. So that's part of your team. It is a team sport, particularly if you're not next door. And I actually recommend, if you're not next, just try to build the team and don't do it yourself, right?
Yes.
At home, if your toilet clogs up, you call a plumber. Well, if
Yep.
you're a couple hours from your Airbnb and the toilet clogs up, just have a list of plumbers that you've worked with.
Yes. Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. So what about communication, right? So of course you have automated messaging, but once our guest checks in and if they have issues, do you respond? Or so that's where I thought a lot of people said that you got to have VA so that it's 24/7, because someone messages you at 2 a.m. Do you respond, or how do you handle that?
So I don't ever get messages at 2 a.m. As I said, I've managed 6 properties and a 7-hour time difference when I lived in Athens, Greece there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But it's on your phone, so you got an Airbnb app on your phone.
Right.
Something comes through, you look at it and answer the question if it's something that's specific. It's just with you all the time.
Right. No, anything else we didn't discuss? Any other gotchas about short-term rentals?
Goodness. I don't know. I think we've covered a lot. I focused heavily there on talking about, getting into short-term. How about this? There's some benefits other than just the money. It should be a fun business. So if you're professional and you're enjoying your margins, reinvesting in your properties is something that if you enjoy doing. Neat thing about Airbnb properties is you make it perfect and new, showroom ready.
Yes.
Every 3 days.
Yep, model
So
home.
unlike a long term where the renter's in there for 2
Yes.
years and then you come in and it's a
Yeah,
mess.
you got to
Oh
restart.
gosh, I got to do carpet and paint and spend 2 months on that. Your
Yeah.
property, you're sort of forcing appreciation through this as well, because you're
Right,
just
that's
making
true.
it incrementally better. Let your guests pay for those new upgrades.
No, that does make sense. Yeah, because you are. So another question I have is that for your strategy, do you focus on certain size of cabin? Does it have to be 1,500 or 2,000 square foot minimum? Does it have to have 3-bedroom minimum? What do you target to have in your property?
So I have a mixture, and everybody has a little different approach on this. Some people really like having the big.
Yes, that's
4 or
what
5.
I heard, that you got to have 4 bedrooms. Minimum.
So I have some 2 bedrooms, I have some 3 bedrooms, and I have some 4 bedrooms. What I have learned recently, particularly I only started with the Rank Breeze tracking maybe 6 months to a year ago, is that there's a real sweet spot for the 3 bedrooms. So I mentioned earlier, a couple will tend not to book a 4
bedroom,
right? Couples do book 3 bedrooms.
3 yeah. Right? Like, it's okay if I can find 2 bedroom. Yeah, 3 is not a problem.
So they tend to get a bigger audience, right? So they appeal to a couple staying, they appeal to 4 people staying, they appeal to 6 people.
Yeah.
So there is kind of a sweet spot.
And if you put a sofa bed, maybe 7 also would fit in, right?
Absolutely. My 3 bedrooms, if you put in a sleeper couch,
yeah.
Right now you could, if we're all good friends, you could put 8 in there. And we also get the ability, one of the reasons that people like the bigger properties is you can charge a higher nightly rate because it's typically going to maybe be split up across 2 families.
Correct.
But we're also given the ability in our softwares to charge extra guest
by
fees,
occupancy. Yeah.
Right. So over, say, 3 or 4 guests, now we can really segment and get a higher per night rate for those stays with more guests.
So another question I have, and maybe you will have to take out your crystal ball right there.
Oh, I like it.
Is that you and I know that it's been too frothy. Stock market, I do a lot of crypto. to real estate. Real estate has just been last couple of years is on a tear. Is it still a good time to buy real estate like cabins or single family for short term or long term, or is it worth waiting um, right now? At the,
I think it depends on your perspective as an investor. I, really did a lot of thinking about this over the last few months, and a lot of real estate professionals outside of short-term rental will give the advice, if you're in it for the long haul, I look at it like I'm going to buy on the way up. I'm
right.
going to buy on the way down.
Correct.
In a way, I'm sort of looking forward to the correction so that we can bring these prices back down.
Yeah, dollar cost average.
and start buying on the lower end again. So, but I just overpaid for a property that closed on in 2 weeks, and from a square footage basis, I paid $50 a square foot more than I would have 6 months or a year ago. But the other side of it is the revenue side is up greater than the acquisition.
You nailed that, right? It's very important to look at the both sides. And the other thing you mentioned is it's very important that you can't, even though I am being very selective, but I can't just sit out of the market. Correct. I'm going to lose all the networking, all the connections I have made, as well as the team I have built. If I just say that, okay, next couple of years, I'm not going to buy, I'm just going to wait it out, right? So it's a process. You got to continue that, including improving your research mechanism, including improving your process and keeping your team intact, right?
Exactly.
So you can't just sit idle. No, this was great. Thank you so much for sharing all this.
Enjoyed it.
Let's take a quick break, and after the break, we'll go to the same question I ask every guest.
You're listening to the Wealth Matters Podcast. The Wealth Matters Podcast. For more info about what we do, check us out at wealthmatters.com. It's wealth, WEALTH, matters, MATRS.com.
Welcome back to Wealth Matters Podcast. Thank you so much, Culin, for sharing a lot of golden nuggets. I got even very enticed by short-term rental now, because I interviewed someone a couple of weeks ago and we spoke about it. Now I'm getting more and more interested. So thank you for sharing all that. Are you ready for fire round?
Sure, let's do it.
Would you be changing any business or investment strategy after this pandemic is over, if it's going to get over?
I have my one pivot through sort of the COVID times and these high priced times is to focus on my current portfolio and really take a close look there and see where I can add value to my existing properties.
No, that's a great point. I think we all had more than enough time to look back, right, and figure out. So that's great. Favorite real estate or finance or any other business book other than yours or mine?
I was going to say yours. The book I probably give out the most and recommend is The Richest Man in Babylon.
Oh, that's a great book. That's one of
my
top
every few
5.
Years.
It's my top 5. Oh, that's a great book.
It's so much about, not just finance and financial matters, but, discipline and,
no, I highly recommend. And it's like old is gold. That's such an old book, and it works in every time, right? If you look back at 1940s to 1970s, 80s, and now it's still valid. Absolutely. Any tool or website you recommend or you cannot live without? Don't say Airbnb.
I know. Jeez. Any tool that I can't live without? I mean, I couldn't live without my price labs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the pricing is pretty important.
The pricing is key because it keeps your occupancy high.
Yes.
So by adjusting those prices, you're keeping your occupancy up, which makes the algorithms happy.
That's a great point. So 2 things, I think. One is the algorithms are happy and you have continuous revenue.
Can't make money when it's sitting idle.
Yeah, exactly. So people think, oh, I'm only going to rent when it's $300 an hour. But if I can get $200 an hour for 5 days instead of 300 for 2 days, I think it's much better in the long haul.
Exactly.
Any advice for beginner investors?
Do get some education, right? There's lots of books. There's lots of good YouTube videos. Get yourself education. find a market where you're interested in, that you wouldn't mind spending some time. That you have to set these things up. Go out there and spend some time and enjoy it, and then just step to the plate. Find a agent, and you might not win that first offer. Often in these, I just lost an offer. There was 23 bidders. So you got to just step to the plate and start swinging, and learn your craft and learn what you like, and kiss a few frogs. Maybe you don't win a few deals, but get out and start. What do they say? It's free to write an offer. Yeah,
right now you got to kiss a lot of frogs to find the princess, right? And that's how it is, the market. But if you don't try, you're not going to get it.
Step to the plate, take a swing.
How do you give back?
How do I give back? I really wrote the book as, the initial part of my give back, because I had helped a number of friends, and there's a lot of books out there that I think don't go into the level of detail. And so I really wanted to show people precisely how they could achieve. The idea was, how do I help people achieve financial freedom through this powerful tool? I think short-term rental investing is the greatest, most stable wealth building opportunity for this generation. And then I also coach. So I do a lot of unpaid, preliminary coaching, where I'm there to actually deliver as much value in a complimentary session, as opposed to, just trying to sell, a package. So I do a lot of coaching of potential hosts and new hosts. So love to help you find that short-term rental of yours.
Yeah, I think so. How can my listeners reach out to you?
Absolutely. The website is hostcoach.co, and my contact information there is there, and Instagram @hostcoach.
Thank you so much for sharing golden nuggets with us, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Alpesh, and thanks to your listeners.
Thanks for listening to the Wealth Matters podcast. If you enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes so others can enjoy the show too. Have a great week and happy investing.